Okay, this is probably the easiest conversion you can do. You know, entry level. This is the one you want to do first. It's easy enough, and what I want you to take away from this is don't fear to fail. These models are cheap enough off eBay, or at least they were before the lockdown. Probably will be again, and if they release a new box starter set with Monopose models, you'll be able to pick up the new stuff relatively cheap, and this is a good way to build up confidence to do more advanced crazy stuff. So you just clip out the bit of the model with the left shoulder pad on it. In this case, it's the back of the torso. For the lieutenant, it's on the arm. There's his left shoulder pad. Now, as you can see, you've got a nice big bit of shoulder pad there to get started with. So the easiest thing to do here is to start with clippers. Uh, it just means you can remove the bulk bit of the material as much as you can before you start using the knife. It looks really messy, it looks really crude and rough, but it does work better than trying to cut big chunks off with a knife. So you just get your side cutters, get your sprue cutters, whatever you've got, and hack away at it. Now, you're not obviously, just basically stabbing it with it to try to get rid of stuff. You're being careful. You're removing as little as you can with each cut, and you just want to make sure that you're giving yourself the easiest job you can do with a knife, because the sprue cutters will go through it much easier, but they're a cruder tool. So once you've trimmed as much away as you can with the sprue cutters, then you move on to the knife. So using the knife, you're really just almost peeling little bits off at a time. The knife's more the fine control. So what you're doing here is you're really just trying to get it down to the point where the shoulder pad will roughly fit on. It might not be too smooth, it might not be perfect, but you can take the other bits away with a file. So really what you're doing is, yeah, this is why you have to be careful. That scar came from me messing around, not with a knife actually, but with a screwdriver. I was trying to open a lithium-ion battery, but different story for a different time. So you can see how small I'm trying to make these cuts and how precise I'm trying to be here. You're literally shaving off small bits, and if the knife doesn't go through, don't try to force it, just take it from the other angle, because if you try to force the knife through, even if your knife's sharp, you're much more liable to cut yourself. So take care, cut it carefully, and then what we're going to do is do a test fit. So you take as much away as you think you might need, and then you get the part you're trying to fit and test fit it. Because you can always, if you've made a mistake and you've cut too much off, you can always stuff it out with green stuff. But it's better to try to be as neat and tight as you can with the plastic than having to resort to green stuff. You can see here that I'm taking the shoulder pad and just loosely fitting it on roughly to see what it looks like. Now you'll also notice I've got the whole model built at this point. Well, not built, but I have the torso and the back. So the front and the back, the whole model, essentially the body of the model is complete. This makes it much easier to see what you're doing. You can really see then how it's going to fit. It does sort of get in the way a little bit, so I'm dropping it. I'm not holding on to it. I haven't built it. It's not glued. And then we're back to trimming a little bit off. So it's an iterative process. You take a little bit off, you test fit, it doesn't look right, you see what bit looks wrong, you trim it, and you just keep doing that, and then eventually get to the point where the shoulder pad will sit nicely. So I'll jump ahead a bit and we'll see how it looks. So you can see here that it's looking better, and you can also see that I'm a klutz, and I'm even trying to put it on upside down, but there we go, get it right this time. So you can see we've nearly got a good fit there. It's not quite right, but it's nearly there. So we've done our rough cuts with the clippers. We've done our more precise work with the knife. So at this point you switch over to the file. What the file does is it gives you much more control. It lets you precisely remove any raised areas. You can work on it a bit more around the shape to get the curve. With a shoulder pad it is more of a curved Um, Curved surface, yeah. So you're trying to get the curve of the surface to match the curve of the shoulder pad, and you can rough it up with a knife, but the file lets you more precisely work. So I'll just file it down and then I'm going to refit the piece. So you see here I have actually glued the front to the back. This is because at this point it was beneficial. So if you find yourself in a point where you need to glue bits together to make your work easier, go ahead and do that. It's not really a big deal at this point because the work I'm doing now is much more precise, much more fine control of the file, or in this case the knife. So you can see here how close to the tip of the knife I'm holding it. You know, there's maybe what 3-4 millimeters of blade sticking out at the end of my fingers. You're literally here. I mean, this is almost like mold line removal. That's the level of trimming I'm doing. You're not removing that much at all. Just those little tiny bits you need to get it to sit right. So precision and care is what you need at this point. And once you've done, your final little bits like this, you can glue the model together and it'll look brilliant. So this is what you end up with once you've been back and forth, with the file, with the knives, just getting it trimmed down. And you can see that the shoulder pad there is almost as good a fit as the one that was molded onto it. When it's part of the actual model, it's hard to get one that fits just as good, but I don't think anybody would notice until they actually realized it was the Salamander's shoulder pad. If it weren't for the color of the plastic, you wouldn't notice that it was not part of the original model. So I'm going to now put all the bits together to produce the final model. They're only going to be stuck together with blue tack, but it's just to give you a rough idea, well, a proper idea of what he's going to look like when he's done. Now, nothing here is glued on except the shoulder pad and the front and the back of the body. The backpack's not glued on, the head's not glued on, and neither of the arms. Well, sorry, the bolter gun arm's not glued on, and the banner's not glued to the arm, is what I meant to say. So you can see that that's a really nice effect. And now we're going to start on the lieutenant. Now he's a bit trickier, only because his shoulder pad is pretty much molded onto the arm, which means there's nothing to really get hold of with the clippers at the start. You can still use the clippers as a rough cut, so it's a bit closer up. You can see, there's not as much to remove, but you can start from the outside the way I'm doing there, and it helps. The more you get off of the clippers, the better, just because they're easier to work with. The knife is much trickier to get bits off with, but it's the exact same process as before. You get as much off with the clippers as you can, then you use the knife and you start trimming away to get the shoulder pad to roughly fit. You really are at this point. This is where the bulk of the work is done with the knife. Just trimming it away very carefully. Trying to make sure you don't cut yourself. I'm just watching this going, that idiot's going to cut himself, and then it's me. So, but I didn't. I did this without cutting myself. You can also see the way I'm almost sawing it off there, rather than trying to cut through it in one push. I'm pulling the blade to let it cut, let the sharpness of the blade do the work, not the force you're exerting on it. If you follow that rule, you should be okay. But it's still important. Knife safety is important. I've said this several times during the video, but it is. You don't want to do this and lose a thumb. That would just be silly. So keep trimming with the knife, keep test fitting. Then when you're a bit closer, you can file it and trim it and file it and go back and forth until you've got the fit you want, until it's good enough for you. And once it's good enough for you, leave it. If you go too far, you can always use a bit of green stuff, as I said before. But generally speaking, if you're being very careful, once you get to the point where you think you're close, you won't have any trouble. If you make a mistake with the clippers and take a big chunk out you didn't mean to, green stuff, is pretty much your only way to go at that point. But, this was the work of 40 minutes, 45 minutes. That's all the time I had to do this in. So you can see that, you know, it's not difficult. This is probably one of the most basic conversions you can do. You know, it's not a kit bash. You're not just taking bits from different models, gluing them together, done. You are taking the clippers to a bit of plastic, cutting bits off and sticking new bits on. So it's the easiest way to get into that kind of thing. And hopefully what the idea I want you to take away here is don't fear to fail. You know, the only way to learn is to fail. And if you think I got this right the first time I tried it, no, not really. I recovered it but I was a bit worried there at one point. But you can buy these. Well, you could buy them before they came out off eBay for relatively cheap, so they're good practice models. You know, once the lockdown lifts, hopefully you'll be able to get them again and you know do them yourself. If you've made it this far, thanks very much for watching. There's another couple of videos there you can click on. You can click on the subscribe button if you want to. Like the video if you want to. Stick a comment down if you've anything to say. And in the meantime, happy wargaming. And I'll see you next time.